whole like transition to architecture software development journey, I owe like huge thanks and to all the mentorship I got from Thomas. Like in during Perkins&Will days, like the way he taught me and Apramaya like how to think, right from like covering all the aspect, like from game development to architectures. I was like very very admired by everything you did, and the best part about working with Thomas is like you can go to the office and then he will pull up a story of his work from the past, and you'll get amazed. He did this like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Like he was so much forward thinking, and that used to amaze like me, both me and Apramaya every time he used to share the stories. So I can't wait to share with the world like all the amazing things you have done in life, and I'm super super inspired by everything you did. So thanks a lot for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited.
Yeah. So Thomas, like take us back in time to your like college days and a bit about where you grew up, why you chose to go to architecture, and how is meeting Thomas Kearns in 20s look like?
Well, that was a long time ago. So I graduated architecture school in 1999. I went to Iowa State University, middle of Iowa in the cornfields. Interesting thing about that though is, at that time, Jennifer Bloomer and Catherine Ingram, Mark Rakitansky were all, editors of probably the most significant architectural theory journal of the time. Assemblage was written at Iowa State. So it was a exciting place to go to architecture school. But it was Iowa. It was also when the internet happened. And so I think freshman year, we were accessing the internet through Telnet command prompt, and came back to school sophomore year and you could see things on the web, right? So and I was immediately drawn to the technology and started developing websites while I was still in architecture school. So that kind of combination early on, I could go back to studio classes where I was presenting 3D models, where professors were saying, "Oh, they'll never replace a physical model," and we'll always build physical models, and we have computer models. So that's when I went to school. I learned to draw ink on Mylar. I used AutoCAD 2, something like that. But I was lucky in that I went in Iowa, where I went to high school, actually had 4 years of drafting prior to college. So I had a pretty good idea that I wanted to do engineering or architecture, and was ready to go to college and do that. So um, that's what I did.
Yeah, and in your college days, what would be like the major shift in mindset in the way you think before, like in your freshman year till you graduate? Like, what was the
Yeah.
major discoveries?
Well, I think to go back to this notion of these architectural theorists that were operating, I was naive. I mean, I think most kids when they go to architecture school are pretty naive as to what architecture really is. I thought it was more like drafting houses, and when I discovered that the world of architecture was actually huge, like in some ways all encompassing, and that if you approached it in this kind of more theoretical, critical thinking kind of a way, that you could take what we were learning in architecture and apply it to just about any kind of complex problem solving situation. So that I think really like cracked things wide open for me, to be able to see that you could be expressive in unconventional ways with space and experience, and that's what really excited me, and kind of open my world for sure.
Yes. And like meeting Thomas in your academic school, is it like, are we meeting a nerdy Thomas who's like geeking out with the various softwares in the architecture projects, or is it like serious studios? Like what's that version?
Well, I would say definitely wasn't the best student, with the exception of studio. I took studio very, very seriously, three times, four times as seriously as I took my other classes. And the digital stuff, I was friends with a bunch of people that weren't in architecture. And I was friends with computer scientists and folks that were introducing me to things that I never would have been exposed to in architecture. But definitely not nerdy. But yeah, I took the studio thing super seriously. So
Now, like, I think I could connect the dots, like how your curiosity of hanging out with computer science guys, also doing various interesting projects. And
a thing to think about is we were, sitting around drinking beer in college at that time. We were talking about how do we get a domain name? Like we had no idea. There was no GoDaddy. There was none of that stuff, right?
uh,
So we didn't really know how to do that. But if we did, we were already hypothesizing about like could we buy Coca-Cola.com,
ooh.
Apple.com. Like we were poised to be able to make, hundreds, thousands of dollars selling domain names, and this would have been the early mid '90s. So yeah, missed opportunity number one.
I think like that's one of the thing during the interview I also want to cover. Like you have seen a lot of ties, like tech cycles, a lot of opportunities, and now you have like a different judgment, like evaluating these tech cycles and like what's the hype, what's the bubble and stuff. So also that wisdom you discovered along the years, like when we come to your current role, I'd like to touch upon that. So
Sure.
now after you graduated, like what were like the options you had for the career path and why you chose the one which
Yeah,
you did?
yeah. Interestingly enough, when I finished architecture school, I was trying to decide if I was going to be an architect. I had grown, Toy Story happened when I was in college, and I spent a number of summers going to SIGGRAPH conferences, and I was pretty sure that I wanted to be involved in like in something at Industrial Light and Magic or some special effects house. And it's basically like, am I going to go to film school, get a master's degree in film, or am I going to go get a job in architecture? And am I going to move to San Francisco, or am I going to move to New York? So those were really like I had four decisions to make, or two decisions to make. And that last year that I was in, well, the last couple years that I was in school, I was working as a web developer. And actually, the last year that I was there, I was working as a freelance web developer, doing some super early e-commerce, business to business e-commerce sites in like 1998. And that ability to do web development and the architecture, I ended up finding this guy Eric Lifton, had a firm called Mesh Architectures in New York, in the late '90s, and he was doing both web development and architecture in the same office, and in some cases with the same client. So you can imagine, the kind of branding of the space and the branding of the website having an explicit relationship. Again, this is 1999. Cutting edge stuff, and Eric had some super interesting ideas about the way that the web was like a space of urbanism, and this very active dialogue about the interaction between the physical and digital. So when I discovered this, it's kind of like a match made in heaven. I was probably one of the only people in the world at that time that was doing both web development and architecture. So was Eric, and so yeah, it was a great match, and we did a lot of really interesting work for a few years while I was in New York, and yeah, and then moved to Chicago.
Th- and I want to touch the point, like you learned web development, and I know one story about like you mentioned like going to the library, reading the book on web
Yeah.
development and that part. So like how, what was it like when you were learning like your, your like when you get stuck, how did you manage, or like is
Yeah.
the self-taught a seed born at that time? Like,
Yeah, I mean, the self-taught seed was born out of necessity. I mean, today self-teaching is facilitated by the internet, but the internet was in its infancy at that time, right? So it was as difficult or more difficult to find things than it would be to go buy a book. And fortunately, that's where most of learning a programming language, that's you bought a book and you learn the programming language. And so I think the story that you're probably thinking of is it goes between my third and fourth year of college. I got a job as a web developer at the university bookstore, and it was supposed to be the job title was something like computer graphics assistant. And I had been using Photoshop and doing things for a while, so that's what I based the kind of what the pursuit on. But I came to find out that the job was for a webmaster, which is what they were called at that time. And I kind of, fake it to make it. Oh yeah, I know how to do that. And literally walked out, got the job, walked out of the hiring manager's office in the bookstore, walked to the door, the HTML section, HTML 1.0, mind you, pulled the book off the shelf and, went to work on Monday after having read the book and knowing how to make a website. But when I left a year and a half later, had implemented an online ordering system. Mind you, this was before there was credit card processing systems. So we had created a database. It was a CGI Perl script that communicated with the database and had products, and it was a shopping cart. All of that, and they'd set up the shopping cart and they send us an order, and then they'd call us and we'd run the credit card over the phone. That was 1997. So yeah, uh, self-taught started really early and has been a very critical part of my career. I couldn't have got to my career without being able to self-teach.
yeah, and I also remember during the IO days, like for like when we were discussing React stuff, like you like go very fast, like pick it up, big apps, and I used to think like here's like some natural like because there's so much noise also on the internet for learning, like where to focus, and like right now, like what are your effective ways to learn fast, like over
I,
the years?
I
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing that's always been the most critical for me is I need to have a problem that I'm trying to solve. I mean, there's definitely been times where it's like, oh, I want to learn a new thing, and of course, you can dive in and learn something, but if you don't, it's like the open source manifesto, right? You find an itch to scratch, and then you just go after that itch, and that's always been the case, even in teaching. Same thing is like you need to contextualize this with a really specific problem to solve. Make up a project, like if you want to learn a new 3D program, make a new project, but like define what that's going to be. If you leave it open ended and ambiguous, the motivator for like tackling the learning is maybe not there. So I think it starts with having a problem to solve.
Problem to solve, and like only like also there's a phenomena where learning just enough to solve the problem rather than like everything that also help with
Yeah,
the
for
productivity.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure. And it's a little bit, becomes a little bit like speed reading, I think, in some ways too, right? And after you've done enough of it, you know which parts of it you need to focus on, which parts of it you can go fast on.
Yeah. So from book to YouTube, Stack Overflow, and now Chat
Yeah.
GPT, like how has the learning cycle changed?
It's similar. It's just faster, right? Like it's just that the search engine has gotten so much better. The results that are coming back are so much better, so much faster. I use every day that I'm writing code, I'm saving an hour plus of work, in the process of using ChatGPT or Copilot or something. And so yeah, it's just happening more continuously maybe now because I sometimes I'm not paying that much attention, right? There's enough trust with some of the requests that it's just a cut and paste, but other times I'm learning something from ChatGPT when it's kicking back their responses.
That's amazing. So you had time in New York, you came back Chicago, and like tell us like first like how was the change of environment? Like both cities has its own culture and
Yeah.
like like first few years after coming back to Chicago.
Yeah, I didn't want to come to Chicago. My wife was interested. We're both from the Midwest, and New York is New York, and 300 square foot apartment in Brooklyn is cool for only so long. But um, yeah, so once we made the decision to come back, I was committed, of course, but I wasn't. I honestly didn't really want to move to Chicago. I was skeptical. The work that I was excited about and the kind of intensity was in New York, and I didn't think that that was here in Chicago. But then, fortunately, when I landed, Eric in New York connected me with a guy named Martin Felsen here in Chicago, runs a practice with his partner, Sarah Dunn, called Urban Lab. And Martin, I kind of did the whole portfolio and, do you have any work? And it's like, oh, I don't, I'd love to hire you. I don't have any work, but, that I could put you on right now. But I'm teaching this class at IIT. And in some ways, you're kind of more suited to teach the class than I am. So we maybe want to co-teach the class. And so that was kind of like opportunity one that started in Chicago. And pretty much at the same time, then the client that I was servicing in New York finished the job and then moved to Chicago. They had a new project coming up, and they were interested in continuing to work with me as a project architect. So the like start of practice and like start of teaching kind of kick off in a way because of moving from New York to Chicago. That opportunity, other opportunities would have been there, of course, but this opportunity, those opportunities wouldn't have ever, I shouldn't say ever happened, but wouldn't happen when they did if I hadn't moved. So in hindsight, like the move ended up being great, and now I've, I like Chicago a lot. Chicago's amazing in the summer. I could care less about Chicago most of the rest of the year. And I still and always will have a very fond place for New York, but it's very different. And yeah, maybe I'm in a different place now and just have a different perspective. So I like being in Chicago and visiting New York. I thought it was
Mm.
always going to be the other way around. uh, but yeah, Chicago's interesting in very different ways. But it's an exciting place too.
Nice. And so that's where your like transition into teaching started. And so you were doing practice, you were doing teaching, and like how did you manage time and also keep up to date with like what's going on? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that I feel like it's kind of the classic model, right? You start a boutique architecture firm and you don't make any money, so you supplement with teaching, right? You get your insurance through the university and you teach, and then you do your kind of professional work on the side. So that academic professional balance, I think, is something that just our tendency to work a lot allows us to do. But it's also was vital to me being able to pursue the kind of work that I wanted to pursue. And the practice that I started, Sandbox, I started with four partners: Sam Keller, Damon Hamilton, Rick Kinty, and Bruce Engel. We had an office in Chicago, an office in New York, and worked for a number of years together. And it being that young, we were in our mid to late 20s at this point, and so being able to have a firm that was garnering the kind of recognition that we were starting to get. It's hard to, especially with five partners, which is like in a way the kind of nail we put in the coffin from the beginning is you got to have a ton of work to be able to support five partners, and so teaching and working, moonlighting, like all the kind of typical things that you do to get a firm like that off the ground. We were doing those things, and doing a lot, I think, super interesting work as a result. Some of the boundaries that if all of your time is spent trying to make enough revenue to live off of, you have to maybe do some different kind of work. So I'd say half of the work that we were doing was self-funded, self-initiated, more theoretical investigations, installation work, things that are sort of more adjacent to quote unquote architecture, but grow from that same mindset of architecture can be whatever we make of it, right? Um, and so that flexibility, I think, is where I was able to maintain the connection to what was happening in the technology. And my partners in Sandbox were committed to very forward progressive thinking. So when I was leaving New York and started teaching, thinking about what I wanted, the kinds of things that I wanted to work on and where I saw things going, I really wanted to be involved in this, like, what I saw was this convergence of the physical space and the digital space. It started with my thesis at Iowa State, and this kind of poorly defined, like I didn't know what it was at that time. It wasn't probably till 20 years later that I figured out what I was trying to say in my undergraduate thesis. But then working with Eric and this notion of web urbanism and how the internet as a space, helped to mature those ideas. And when we kind of started moving into Sandbox, for Eric, he was thinking about the web. I was thinking about video games. I was thinking about the place where like the web is immersive in a certain way. Video games are immersive in a different way. And that's what I was really after. I wanted to think about like the immersive space of video games in the physical space, and like how do we imagine a future where these two things come together in some way. And I coined this term simultaneous occupation, which is the best way that I could think of at the time to describe what I was after, which is experiences that happen only when you're occupying both of these spaces at the same time. Right. So the inherent notion of like hybridized space. That was, again, this is 1999 in my thesis, to moving into 2000 to early 2000s with Mesh and Sandbox. So, we were able to do work like our Walls Optional project, where we're, creating sort of digital space, where you have the physical environment, we're creating sensor conditions to track physical elements and moving walls, and creating responsive conditions between these two. That's what I was super excited about, and the teaching at IIT enabled a lot of that too. So, of course, I was teaching more conventional classes of how to model in 3D Studio Max. But the class that I started teaching first was a class called, well, when Martin was teaching it, it's called Web Technologies. Eventually transitioned that to a class called Networked Technologies. But it was about exactly what we were talking about at Mesh, right? The kind of notion of the web is an extension of physical space. And so classes like network technologies and ultimately seminars later and studios later gave me a platform to also explore with students, these emerging technologies, and then to do them in practice, and, kind of classic story of thinking about the relationship between the two. So that was how teaching got started, really, because of those technologies.
I see. And this was like late 2000s.
This would have, I started teaching, I think, in 2003.
Mm. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, 2000, I think 2003, spring of 2003, or maybe spring of 2004. That was the first year was I taught this class with Martin. That was the in, right? Because I think I was 26, 25 or 26 at the time. I didn't have a master's degree. I didn't understand, how I was qualified in some ways to teach. I didn't think they would hire somebody without a master's degree, but I, taught the class. It was a success. The next year, they asked me back. I had a full-time teaching position under a chair, like a digital chair position, that was funded by a donor. And that allowed me, I think, to prove that I was capable of teaching. I mean, I had expertise at that time that still wasn't very prevalent, in the world, of architecture, certainly. And so, yeah, again, that was the in. And then a year later, I was teaching in first year studio and on a tenure track, role, actually. So it's kind of all unfolded pretty quickly.
I see. And like, I'm curious to know, like, running business, teaching, like, running an architecture practice is super hard. And like a lot of business lessons you learn actually by doing it, which are a lot of time not taught in school. So, any lessons you could share from ups and downs of running Sandbox, and how like it could help the listeners, like, okay, about running a
Yeah.
business today.
Not really, because I say, especially at that time, my business acumen, I was entrepreneurial for sure, but my business acumen was maybe not so great. And it wasn't, I don't think we were approaching it from a position of passion and not a sensible business position. um, and I think that was fine where we were at that time. I think it was the right thing to do, and a great experience. But I don't think that I necessarily learned any good business lessons out of it. I think the startup, was coming down the road later, was a much better lesson in real business. And I think actually even now today, the business mentality is even more important today, as I'm now working for somebody else and not myself.
Mm. Yeah, because right now, like, the cost to make a software using like ChatGPT and GPT-4 is getting lower and lower. The time spent, the
Hmm.
and also to hire someone, a lot of things you can automate or build it yourself. So now the business scale of like
Yeah.
for B2B, B2C, like is very important. Yeah. One of the story which amazed me, like I couldn't sleep that night, once you shared, was like your interaction with Virgil Abloh, and
Yeah.
I want to talk about it for sure. So like, tell us like how it is, and like your history with
Well,
him.
yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with Virgil, and his work, his background, he grew up in Chicago. He went to IIT, and he was at IIT. He was honestly a pretty quiet guy. Wasn't like shaking things up or disrupting. Just kind of just that super stylish, pretty quiet guy in the background. Paying attention, and had a presence for sure. But that actually, my first interaction with him was in that class, network technologies. And what we were talking about, what I spent a lot of time talking about there was, you know kind of what we started talking about at the beginning, that architecture, could be all whatever you want it to be, right? Like I can take architectural thinking and I can apply it to a pair of shoes or to streetwear. And the point of the class was to help students realize that if they engaged with these new emerging technologies, it was like trying to help them to see the relationship to the built environment, to the relationship to architecture, but at the same time to open up the opportunity to say, well, I could do all of these other things too, and diversify my possibilities for, where I work, what I do, how I make money. And so I think like that was in the underlying point of the class, and that's what really resonated with Virgil. You can read the GQ article where he essentially credits that class as letting him see that he could take this and he could run with it in a different way, and that and that's what he did. But the Virgil, I don't know, he just was a really solid person. And I think quiet and humble in a way that you wouldn't expect from somebody who, in some ways, is so outspoken. And, I think, uh, yeah, he's just a special guy. I miss Virgil for sure.
Yes. And like from my like interaction with you, like I find inherently, based on the way you talk and teach, like you you make people think about developing a tool rather than like learning the tool for its sake. So it's the design thinking or fused with technological integration. Like, and you were teaching first years as well as like other. So how to have that mindset shift in a way that it's not too much like prescriptive, but let it flow organically and let the students tinker and wonder.
Yeah. I mean, I think, in the design communications work that we were doing at IIT, we're trying to, there's this notion, it's a Milton Glaser, I think, coined the phrase "drawing is thinking," right? That the process, this kind of like mental to body process of moving the pencil and the contemplation that's happening like constantly through the experience. Um, I feel like that's this really exciting, for me at least, that's a really exciting creative space to be in. You have to have a certain level of control and mastery of the tool that can only come by practicing it over and over and over. But like once you have some control over it, the ability to turn that kind of creation process into the thinking, simultaneous thinking process, uh, finding the place of openness with yourself to be able to operate there. I think just like really exciting things can happen. And I think whether that's a tool like Grasshopper, or that's a pencil, or for me, that's kind of all kind of part and parcel. But you have to get to know it, and you have to explore it. And if you're too prescriptive, you can learn those things, and you can get really good at those prescriptive things. But then if you don't ever turn the pencil on its side and like move it a different way, you're missing out on all this opportunity. A lot of that is the foundation for the startup that comes later, right? That notion of yeah, producer, being a producer rather than a consumer, being a tool builder rather than a tool user. It's a much, in my opinion, it's much more empowering place to be, right? Much more agency.
God. And on a side note, like Brahma and I know like all the crazy adventure stories from skiing to biking, dirt biking, like, and it's like a whole another side of you of like how like what gives you adrenaline rush in like like this 2000 era. Like, what were your hobbies? Like, what gave you rush?
All of the work that we were doing, I would say not in a healthy way. The workaholism, the drive and the passion, kind of to your kind of inquiry about managing academia, like and work at the same time, through really up until, I mean, I'm 48 now, up until I turned 30, like all through 20s, I was so incredibly focused on architecture, and didn't ski and didn't jump my bike and didn't do all the stuff that I do now. And in some ways that's probably my biggest regret, is that I was too focused and too driven on my career to like give myself the proper work life balance. I sleep more now. I ride my bike more. I just got back from Utah a couple days ago.
Whoa.
And that's, that today, that's a really critical balance, and something that, and I think I probably talked to you about when you started working, but at Perkins&Will. But I think, we need to be better with ourselves about finding those things outside of work and outside of architecture, for sure.
I see. Yeah, like I think a major shift personally for me happened like when I was just like working all the time versus taking a pause and taking a break is sometimes that pause does two things. Like it it makes you think, okay, what to focus rather than just doing everything. Like you could be smart about and selecting few things. And once you are in a break as a workaholic, sometimes like, okay, when is this gonna end? And I go back to work and work with more intensity. So it,
Absolutely, absolutely. Work hard, play hard.
yeah.
Definitely how I go.
Yeah. So have we reached to the economic crisis yet in the
Yeah,
2000?
yeah. Yeah, basically that's exactly right. So now we're looking at real estate market collapse. We're the clients that were, paying us to design their 1,000 square foot residences, $1,000 square foot residences, wasn't coming through as well. That's when I went back to school. I was thinking at that time, now's my chance. I can get out of architecture. And so I left the tenure track process, continued to teach full time, but went to DePaul and got a master's degree in software engineering focused on game development. Thought I was going to go make video games, and not do buildings anymore, but that didn't happen.
That's, yeah, and actually, the moment you mention Seagraph, like I went in LA and immediately thought, okay, Thomas, you gotta like be here. It's so many interesting tech, and it's a
So exciting. Yeah.
great intersection of like multiple fields, and we can learn and adopt so much in architecture as well. I also remember Nick was also there. Like he went to few
Hmm.
Seagraphs too. So it's very underrated conference like among the architects. I don't know like why we don't
Yeah.
often recommend that.
Nobody knows. I mean, the bigger tech is there, right? Like, the harder tech is there. That's where we should be looking, for sure.
And I remember one project you mentioned. I don't know, was it during your masters? It was for Chicago, like urban mobility, like calculating the bus rides.
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
w-
Yeah, that came. So basically, I did the degree program at DePaul, um, and was still teaching. And right towards the end of it, maybe I hadn't finished the degree program yet. Keith Besserud was the director of the Black Box Studio at SOM at the time, and Keith, I had known Keith from Chicago for a bit, and Keith asked me to work on a project with them that was focused on urban information. We ended up calling it urban information modeling, as BIM was just kind of happening at that time. And yeah, so that project in a way kind of took the geospatial expertise that I had been amassing in that kind of self-taught way, at IIT, and really turbocharged it. That was like big data was happening at that time, as well as the federal government's data.gov program. At the time, City of Chicago, the CTO was a guy named John Tolva, who had come from IBM. And that this like it was that's just what everyone was talking about: big data, big data, big data. And so I did this work with SOM that we were connecting, basically building Speckle before Speckle was Speckle, right? We had a Postgres spatial database that we were interoperating between Excel and 3D Studio Max so that urban designers could do GIS things in 3D Studio Max because they weren't using GIS at the time. But that then translated to some interesting things back at IIT, running some urban design studios, data-driven urban design studios, and was working, had a assistant professor working with me, Jordan Cantor, and we were doing, some super interesting things at the time. This would have been probably about 12 years ago, 2012-ish, I think. And first semester was an analytical project, understanding data. So the kind of things that you could imagine, scraping social media and looking at sentiment, and some interesting things with tracking like physical response, heart rate, galvanic skin response, while people, to body sensors as they moved through the city, so that you could start to think of from like a pedestrian standpoint, like moving through a busy intersection and being able to get the physical response to the body as a data signal, to then start to correlate with all of these sort of other activities. And then in the second semester, we were using processing at the time. So this was post GIS connected to processing, doing agent based modeling to do data driven urban design. So one of the projects was a self-routing bus system like Uber, right? Everybody calls the bus, and the bus figures out what's the most optimized route through the city, and it was a working simulation in the end. Another project where students were rethinking the TIF, the tax increment financing system, to be a data driven, like where there's surpluses and whatnot, to be able to shift resources around and think about where development should happen based on the needs and demands of the community. Lots of interesting stuff happening at IIT at that time.
Yeah, and like even like during our like game development and visualization project, the way like one of the biggest thing I learned from you was like thinking in systems. Like I know like we could talk about okay how to think in systems, but when you actually develop a game, like the tick rate, like you are forced to think in system, and that was like a very like a big thinking change for me when we were doing that project. And like the projects you did at school and teaching, like those were like so many interesting ideas, like even the scaling where okay how many agents are coordinating, and like once this like gets bigger, like how to handle that level of scale is like super interesting problems. So after that, like again you had like choices to
Yeah.
like work in game industry, go back to architecture, start your own, like how did
Yeah.
you navigate that time?
Well, after SOM, there was a big reorg at IIT. There has been this kind of legacy of IIT for decades, and um, the architect Viola-Retz, Dutch architect Viola-Retz, was hired to be the new dean. And when he came in, they did a complete curricular overhaul. And in that process, this is when I was doing the work with SOM, and so that kind of data-driven urban stuff was very compelling to them. My background with video games, was kind of a unique person. So they asked me to pursue this directorship in design communications. And at that time, I was like, well, I have this startup idea, and I could you know, focus on the startup idea. I could go get a job. I had a couple offers to do a game development offer, a software consulting offer, and I was just when the directorship came up, it was kind of like, well, that's an opportunity that probably won't come around again soon, especially if I leave academia. And if I do that, if I commit to this, however many more years in academia, then I can focus on the startup. I can, instead of in the way I was working, on Sandbox and teaching before, now I can teach and I can spend my free time kind of like cooking this startup idea. And yeah, about a year or so after that directorship, after I took the role as a director, I met the person who had become the investor in the startup shortly thereafter. So um, in the end, that was the right decision. I got to cook the startup. I found the investor. We started the startup and operated it for about 9 months before it was too much and I had to leave teaching. So that was ended up kind of sealing the deal. And it was the first time in my life at that point, probably that I had only one job,
Mm.
just run the startup. Yeah.
Yeah, and this like the first startup were like total five partners, and this time it was lesser, so more responsibility, more pressure, I guess,
Yeah,
relatively.
this was, I would say the first one was like starting in architecture from, it's a startup and it's no small feat. This was a startup in the classic sense. I had an idea, I had a business plan, I pitched it to somebody. They were like, yeah, I've been thinking about some similar things. This sounds interesting. Let's talk some more. Um, you know, what do you think evaluation is? How, here's the amount of money I'm going to put in initially. And yeah, we was an angel investor, and we co-founded a startup called BitSpace, which is still in operation today. It really took everything that I was doing at IIT in the design communications curriculum. And if, we didn't necessarily talk about it, but we were teaching, this was a 4 course sequence that all undergraduate students were required to take. And it had all of the standard drawing and, physical communication stuff, but also included digital fabrication. We were teaching CNC, we were teaching programming Arduinos, we were teaching Unity, we were teaching Python, we were teaching C Sharp, we were teaching like all the stuff that you and I would want, like a really progressive, computationally minded architect to be able to do today. We were teaching those things in this 4 course required sequence then. So it was kind of like all this stuff. And I basically took all of the same tools, all of the same techniques, Unity and Arduino and, laser cutters and 3D printers, and packaged the same content for the K through 12 space. And this was at the time when STEM was starting to become a hot term in education, and maker labs were a concept that was emerging. So we built a 5,000 square foot maker lab with, real laser cutters and real tools. And we made it exclusively for children.
I see. And like you, when you left IIT, you had to leave the career choice of tenureship, right? And
Yeah, I mean, I made that decision. The tenureship decision was made when I made the decision to go back to school. And I
oh
was
my God.
really, really lucky at that time because I think in most cases, the dean would be like, okay, well, see ya. But Dean Robertson at the time was very supportive and kept me on to continue to teach full time. While I was in school, and then continued for a few years after school, and then left to do the startup. Yeah.
Man, like during school, you were learning as well as teaching. How it's, I could get like imagine like how busy you were. Like it's crazy. Like, have you ever got burned out? Which we
Yeah,
didn't cover here.
yeah. I mean, definitely been times of burnout. A lot of those, thinking about the transition, the height of Sandbox, and then the decline of the real estate market. Like, there's definitely a point of burnout there. There's a point of burnout we're about to get to a few years, into the startup, and seeing the kind of horizon for other things, and yeah, and then where I'm at now. But yeah, no burnout in sight, partly because I have a much better work-life balance today than I did then. So I'm still running all over the place all the time, but I know when to stop at this point.
Yeah. In that stop muscle, did it happen when she started at Perkins&Will, or like somewhere in bit space you thought, okay, let me take a step back, prioritize work-life balance, like.
Yeah, I think BitSpace was the catalyst for seeing that, like, um, it, architecture has a tendency, a kind of legacy of creating, I think, in some cases, toxic work environments. We work like crazy. We do all these all-nighters in studio, and not because our professors say that we have to. On some level, it's because we're driven to do that. And then you have all of these architects who run their practices on what borders on slave labor, and just the whole economic sort of system kind of continues to support that. And I think it's getting better, and I'm excited by your generation, who are standing up for themselves and saying that this isn't healthy and this isn't right and it shouldn't continue this way. And I'm excited by like Dankoid Wright and all the stuff that they're doing, kind of promoting those messages. I think that's great. That's not the context that I grew up in, and I think I started BitSpace with people who kind of came from this space. But as it grew, it got to a certain point. We're at 30 people, and we're hiring folks who they're not doing they're not there because they're passionate about the cause. They're there because they need a job, and it seems like an interesting place to work, and it looks fun. You can't put the same expectations onto those folks as you would on the folks who are ready to go work an unpaid internship, right? And the drivers and the motivators are different. The economics are different. And I think I wasn't in the right place to really truly understand that. I think it created some friction in BitSpace, certainly, and with me in BitSpace in the later years. And I think leaving BitSpace, and then going to work in like the opposite of what I have made my career, like bootstrapping, small shops, working for small shops, being a small shop, being the underdog, and then now like working in the second largest architecture firm in the world, and working kind of big corporate in a way. um, I, I'm thankful that I like made was making that transition as I got here, because it's helped me to create boundaries in my time. I mean, I still work more than 40 hours a week, but I have a certain flexibility that allows me to do that, and like I can do that when it's right to do that, and maintain, go to the gym first and spend some time at the gym, and then do some work. So I'm lucky to be able to do it that way. But things are different today than they were then, as a result of then.
I see. And also, like, one thing I really loved about the IO team and like environment is it's kind of also like a lot of autonomy and startup like lots of
Mhm.
projects. And one thing I used to discuss with Aprama, like sometimes when we are starting new projects and we could see you like working so much passionately about that problem, and like sometimes like when we like talk the next morning and like, oh, I did this, and I've been like, he has the energy and attitude of like young 20s, and like he's so much passionate about like all these things, and we used to admire like, okay man. And sometimes give us like, okay, now like looking at Thomas, I think we are not working hard enough, and like we used to like we used to put like more like in a good way, like it motivated us. And like part of me feels that you have this like maybe like a happiness where you get creating things or building things. And like tell us like what gets you motivated or into the flow state about a problem.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's about flow state, right? Same thing we could talk about skiing or running or biking. Yeah, I would say the ADHD properties are strong, in me, and so those times, like often explain to people that like skiing is pure focus. It's like one of the only times in my life where I'm only thinking about that, and I'm so dialed in that that's when I'm happiest, right?
Mm,
And I think work often can get to that point. I'm sure 3D Guru, I'm sure you've had late nights grokking code where, you start and then 15 hours later, you're like 5 days ahead of where you plan to be, and you're just in that zone. Um, I don't know if I seek it out or am really focused on getting there so much, but I do find myself in that state frequently, and that's, I'm sure, what you're referring to. You just like wake up the next morning and you have a whole new proof of concept, that sometimes it works that way.
but like it was like it's an experience like it's one of the pleasure working with you. And like so are you more of like 0 to 1 person compared to 1 to 10?
Well, I I would say, um, I am the 0 to 1 is what I love, but maybe that's not the 0 to 1 that a lot of people think. So I feel like in many people's mind, the 0 to 1 is like the first realization of the idea. But you take something like BitSpace, uh, you can write a 50-page business plan, um, and you can run. We ran workshops with kindergarten students in public schools, to like test the waters a little bit, right? Like that's not really the one, right? The one is opening a 5,000 square foot location, running summer camps for a summer, being cash flow positive at the end of the year or at the end of the summer, and then, being able to reinvest back into the business. And that process, that's like a year, that's a 9 to 18 month process, right? So like that's the thing that is really exciting to me, is like when it goes from it's an idea to now it's a real thing. And so, like we're reimagining, restructuring the investment kind of digital innovation funnel at Perkins&Will now, and we're thinking about being very rigorous about the stages of investment. And many cases, like for some people, the 0 to 1 is what's happening at the very beginning. Like, oh, here's the first instance, the thing. But it's really not until it's come down to the point of it once it starts to be built with real software on a real technology stack that real people can put their hands on. It's not a prototype. I would say what a lot of people refer to as a proof of concept is not a true proof of concept. I'm interested in that space. I'm interested at the point at which it becomes a real thing, and making sure that the energy and the idea and the concept and all of that, like all of the secret sauce that like is maintains once you get to the other side of the one and you have a real thing, to still have some of those original intentions, like that's what you're fighting for, right? So that's when it becomes really exciting to me is I now have this thing that's real, and maybe it doesn't do everything that I wanted it to do when I set out, but it's doing some of these really fundamental core things that I said it was going to do, and then it that hadn't been done before. That's the 0 to 1 that excites me. So it has to get to a certain point of reality before for me. So
Yes. And like I just realized we haven't reached to your career current role, and it's 1 hour already. I knew like
yeah.
you have so many amazing stories to share. Like maybe we need a part two. But like um
Yeah, your call. We could do part two, or we could just keep going.
yeah. Uh can you like give us what is like a week in your life of digital innovation strategist at Perkins and will look like? Like what's
Yeah.
that role? Yeah.
Well, I would say it depends. It definitely ebbs and flows. If you were to average it out over the course of the year, I probably spend half of my time doing strategy, making decks and doing research, and a lot of talking with stakeholders and teams and all of that kind of stuff, users, and then the other half actually writing code. And I think that's been the big challenge for me. And I think where I'm seeing things going in the future is being able to spend more time on the strategy and less time writing code. We need more great people to write code to be able to do that for sure. But I think that's where my role will go more in the future. But I really like again balance and like do being in both places. If I wasn't actually writing code, I think I would be unhappy. I find back to again to the flow state and like being in that, like I find pleasure there. And so that and being able to advance, sometimes I want to just like, I just want to be able to make the thing. And I know that I can make the thing faster than somebody else can make the thing. So, in some ways it kills me to delegate to something that's kind of like, I could do it a lot faster. So let me just do it. But I'm getting better about it.
Yeah, like I like for person who's like bootstrapper solo, like doing a lot of building solo, the delegation muscle it takes a while like to build that. And like also I think another important skill like which I think for people who aspire to be digital innovation strategists is like identifying the technology opportunity and also estimating like how much resources and time it would take to build, because like you could like a lot of times people underestimate what happens in short term and like it's other way around, overestimate for short term and underestimate for long term.
Yeah.
So like how was your uh like did it came naturally to you, like the amount of time it would take, or how did that A/B testing
No,
go?
not at all. I would say probably the thing that I've been the worst about in my career is estimating how long it takes to actually get something done. It's the classic story of how I can see instantly the path to the finish line makes it seem a lot easier than it really is. And the next thing you spent twice as many hours and you've just devalued whatever your revenue is at the end of the day. So definitely have a long history of that, but I think getting much better in the last couple of years, especially at Perkins&Will, uh, running both the dev team and the kind of prototyping endeavors. Just again, this is more experience being able to say, okay, I have much better sense of how long it's going to take now. And if we're talking about the real call it the MVP dev over the dev that I'm doing in the POC, I just now I'm to the point where I just say it's probably going to also take twice as long as I think that as long twice as long as I think it's going to take. You know, will be how long the devs think it will take.
Yeah, like because like I saw the dev team and the way they like did like stand-ups, also like spend the time in documentation, like
Mhm.
it's a different rigor. Like yeah,
It is, and I think sometimes it's challenging for me because I know that like I'm build the way that we're building now too. Like Portfolio Explorer has really become an actual platform, and so now we can build on top of it. So I can stand up something really quick, and I can create an app with 20 React components and a back end, full stack application, and like it's doing all this stuff, and I can do that in a few days. Um, and what I'm now, with some maturity over the last couple of years, able to recognize is all of the scrum and the pointing and all of the stuff like helps just keep things on the rails enough that we don't really have bugs,
mm,
like knock on wood. That deliberate rigor that the dev team employs, that's very different than the kind of fervor that I employ, is needed to make sure that we're not going to have bugs down the road, and that things are stable and well maintained and maintainable. So definitely have grown an appreciation for that. I mean, do I think we can speed up? Yeah, I think we could still speed up, but I think that we're moving along in a good way. So yeah, it's definitely different.
I see. Yeah, and like one thing I think I wanted to know more, like from your first date till date, like having an idea and proposing it to the higher management is one thing, but also like what I saw and observed is like the patience game of constantly like uh, sharing that idea, also
Yeah,
reminding the business value and convincing the idea and getting the resources. I think that is not often talked in AEC, like
yeah, yeah,
how do we execute that and be like
yeah.
things along the way. Yeah, can you share? Yeah.
Persistence is definitely a big part of it. You probably remember a project by the code name Mantle. Pretty simple concept, relatively speaking, in software engineering, right? It's a microservices back end that we can use as a foundation, or the mantle that we build on top of for all of these other applications. And that's an idea that we started 2.5, 3 years ago, as, hey, look, this is something that we should invest in. We're standing up all of these different backends, and it doesn't make sense. So, that strategic thinking, we you may recall, like, we weren't our charge is not to build platforms, and you don't want to it's not a good way to approach, build the platform first, right? You need to find the right problem to solve, and then you build the platform in the process of solving that problem. But if you don't, and that's fine, I think that's the right way that you should do it. But if you're not talking about what that platform is or should be or could be, and you're just going to wait until you finish the front end thing and then go back and look at it, I think you're missing an opportunity to like cultivate that platform along the way. So when leadership is pushing back and saying, oh, we don't, Mantle's fine, it's a great idea, but what's the problem to solve? You can't let Mantle get lost in that conversation, right? And the only way that, it's kind of, think about like a kid playing with a balloon, like you're like trying to keep the balloon up in the air, right? So you just have to, every time that it's relevant, you have to express the value of the thing that you're championing. And even if somebody is poo-pooing it or not paying attention or saying we'll get to it later, you know, don't don't get upset about it and yell and scream and call people dumb, but say, okay, like, think, like, be quiet, like, step back, wait for the next opportunity, bring it up again, and eventually, one, either somebody else is going to like pick up what you're saying, and then they're going to start repeating it, and that's oftentimes how things get going. But yeah, you have to continue to express the value when you believe in it, even if other people don't necessarily see it. And I think if you have the opportunity to be persistent about it, and the idea really does have value, it'll stick, and it has. So now we have Mantle, and we're thinking about how we mature Mantle, and it exists. It wouldn't have existed if we didn't do that starting 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and like coming from that startup world where like from idea to decision, like you have like more autonomy. It's a different game you're playing where like there are multiple stakeholders involved, and like it reminded me of like a data strategy, like okay, cleaning data and structuring it for like future ML use case or business. Like in short term,
Mhm.
like spending all the resources on cleaning the data. There's no immediate like revenue increase or productivity increase. It's a long term strategy, and it's
Yeah, for
sometimes
sure.
difficult to like communicate.
Yeah, you just have to find the right place to like lift up that. It's like a stream that needs to be there, and you just got to kind of pull it up into focus when you can, whenever you have the opportunity, mature it, and then let it drop back down.
I'm gonna like come back to the thing I touched before. So
Hmm.
I think during my time there, like we had like so many interesting discussions regarding blockchain and metaverse as well. After seeing a lot of the cycles, like how do
Yeah.
you navigate this? Like, and now
Yeah.
I don't know with Apple Vision Pro again the metaverse will come back again or not. But yeah,
Well, you probably remember, I mean, it's all such a blur at this point. The last 18 months has been pretty nuts. Um, because I'm trying to think, we were still 18 months ago, we were still talking about metaverse, right? And then January of last year was when we built the Gen AI, the speech to text to Gen AI for the Santa Monica Airport project, and then it all changed, right? Then all we talked about was AI, and we didn't talk about metaverse anymore. So, yeah, like in that like 6 to 12 month, 6 months before AI, um, we were talking about how the technologies have come so far, right? I was talking about simultaneous occupation, and into the year 2000. I read Snow Crash, like I was that was part of, definitely, and William Gibson, and like definitely part of the ideas. So to see all of that, like that was why it was so exciting for me to be in the position that I was at Perkins&Will, as metaverse is coming as this like hot thing. Like I've been working my whole career waiting for, not even so much of like waiting for the technology to catch up, but waiting for the culture to catch up, to be able to actually have the conversation. But I still knew at that time, and I mean, you remember, how many metaverse projects did I kind of poo-poo at the time, because there wasn't a real good use case. There wasn't a strong value proposition. Some of the entertainment stuff, concerts and sports, and all that seems kind of cool and interesting, but at that time I didn't buy that it was going to be a mainstream thing. And I always felt, well, I felt then that we're like 5 years away. And I think you can look at the hype cycle and see a similar trajectory. But what was exciting to me was, okay, now we can start working on what this is going to be in 5 years. Not the metaverse is here now, and this is going to be awesome. Let's do it today. But okay, now we can start talking. We can start working on this again in a real concerted way. Industry will hopefully pay attention, and this might go somewhere. But I would say it's still like 4 years away, three to 5 years away before we're really gonna see the true metaverse. And I do think that Vision Pro helps tremendously. Accenture has spatial computing on the like top four tech trends for 2024. Um, they are clearly wanting to do some work in that space. So like I think we're gonna see spatial computing um, lift up the investment again, get people cooking again. And I think, yeah, in like 2 or 3 years, when all of that pans out, it's really going to be on. And that's what I'm looking forward to. And I think that Gen AI is incredibly vital. Like that's one of the most important things in order for us to actually get to that point. It's clear that the fidelity of the experience needs Gen AI in order to happen fast enough to be, otherwise I just like I don't know how it would really work without it at this point. So it seems really clear to me that the metaverse is going to happen. It's not going to happen in a video game like place that you go away to. It's going to happen in the built environment. It's going to happen as an augmented reality overlay over the built environment. And we won't look at it through Vision Pro. We'll look at it through our contact lenses or through our regular glasses or whatever. But it's going to take getting to that point before it's the simultaneous occupation that I've been waiting for. But yeah, it'll be here soon.
Yeah, like I could see like your point, and like a lot of the things are moving towards like hyper photorealism in real time, like with LLMs model LLM with almost like faster response times, and then
Yeah,
in gaming I've seen like NPCs which are getting smart enough that are making decisions on the fly using LLM, and
yeah,
then coupled with like diffusion models which can generate images on the fly, and also now with
yeah,
Sora videos where you could
yeah.
create
It's
scenes on the
incredible.
fly. Yeah, yeah. So everything will converge, I guess.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
even with therapy I've seen like what if like immersive, like if AI therapy is like right now there are mediums you can just go on a walk and talk, but if you can create a character, make it realistic and
Yeah.
add emotions and attachment, like it's
Therapy, education, yeah, wellness, like all sorts of. I mean, it will be pervasive. I do believe that it will be a revolutionary sort of communication deployment system, not unlike the way the internet was when it came out. I do believe that hype. Um, yeah, just not
yeah,
not here yet, not quite yet.
yeah. I want to take like some hot take from you, like
Hmm.
uh bold takes for 2024 and in like short term and 2030, like what would be different or radical, like not
Yeah.
like long big changes.
Um, Wow, 2024. It's in a way I'm either so close or so far that there's this like midterm space that unfortunately I don't spend as much time thinking about. Like in a way, my 2024 is kind of already road mapped out for me in in some ways. But thinking about 2030, I mean, I'll go for the hot take. I'm not the only person that has said these things, but I'll say it. Like I think by 2030, I think that we're gonna see a massive change in employment in the world as a result of AI. I think that things like construction documents in for an architecture firm by 2030, I think will be largely produced by AI. And I think there's a really important question embedded in that about, what happens to, the resources, the human resources, of which 40% of the scope of work of the project was dedicated to, when we don't need those resources anymore. like what are the implications of that? And I think firms like Perkins&Will have a decision to make about, how they approach revenue and profitability and pursuit of more work with fewer people or more work with the same people. I think that's the idea, that the optimistic idea that we all are talking about now is, yeah, we're just going to do better work. We're going to do more work. Our buildings are going to be healthier as a result. And, there's like, it's going to be better. And I want to believe that, but at the same time, I just think that at a certain point, the work is going to run out and that there's not enough work to do. And that maybe it's not 40%, maybe it's only 30%, but even a 30% reduction in staff is an unemployment, a social crisis of unemployment that I don't think that our government is able to actually, that they're not ready for, right? And this is where you start to have conversations about universal basic income and other things that need to be considered at the same time of this. And that's not even to get into, and I don't know if you saw the post that I made yesterday, day before, but OpenAI has a job out right now, technical program manager, preparedness, right? Job is to watch the AG1, like, is it gonna destroy the world? Looks like it's probably gonna. Somebody needs to hit the button, right? Like, it's a scary time. I want to be optimistic. I'm wholly invested and like 100% ahead, but I'm really concerned, and I think there's going to be a major change. There will have to be a major change in society and how we approach work and living in by 20. I think by 2030.
Yeah, like it makes me feel like with each year compared to the past, like the technological change per year is getting way faster. Like the
It's
compute,
not linear. It's not a
yeah,
linear growth, right? That's just what I mean. Like we say 2030 is 6 years away, right? So like 6 years, think about how fast, how far we've come in 12 months. I mean, I I feel like I have a pretty good handle on where things are going and always have, but I am just completely blown away by how much farther along we are 12 months later. So when I think about that and really scale that up in an exponential way in 6 years, like Ray Kurzweil said that, nanobots were going to go into our body and disconnect our senses and reconnect our senses to a digital stream so that it's indistinguishable. We think we're touching a thing, we think we're smelling a thing, right? Ray Kurzweil, who has basically been on the money about his predictions, this whole time, says that that's 2030. So is that the singularity? Right? If that's really the case, like, so much happens between now and 2030 that we don't have any idea. So yeah, 2030 architecture, nothing is going to be the same in 2030. I don't think.
yeah, like and also like I think although there is like more marketable thing like okay, generate like flashy images with mid journey, and there are like a lot of systems like an architecture practice could have like we like at 3D Guru we like we have systems from marketing like creating the like it's the
Hmm.
workflow automation. I'm very excited, and I think if we have like this agents doing this workflow, that's where you get a lot of intern work automation. And uh, I think the autonomous agents not in the design but in like other parts of like the
Yeah.
practice is gonna boost the productivity to another level.
That's the thing that's so incredible about this. And I don't know if you've heard me tell this kind of story from this angle or not, but I told you I learned how to draft ink on Mylar when I had my first internship. Was at an architecture firm in Iowa, and we still had draftspeople. There was a person whose job, they weren't an architect, they weren't trained as an architect, they were a draftsperson, and they did all of the drafting. And like while I was there, practically the drafts people went away and AutoCAD came in, and now the architect is doing the drawing in AutoCAD as opposed to the draftsperson. And that was a major shift in roles in some disciplines, in architecture, mechanical engineering, civil engineering, right? Those disciplines that use draftspeople saw CAD come in and have an entire role for the most part removed. Now, some people that were draftspeople upskilled and became architects. Some people that were draftspeople were like, oh, I guess I'll do something else, and they went and did something else. And draftsmen went away, and that wasn't necessarily an economic crisis. It only affected like certain disciplines. We're talking about something that is going to affect every job of every sector, every market, everything at the same time. Like I just like that's a level of change and impact into the way the world works that is so unprecedented. Like how can we think that we can just like incrementally move our regulations, incrementally move our resource, support for society? Like it's not gonna work. That's my
Yeah.
hot take. It's not gonna work.
It gives like different level of concerns, and like even like for education, like
Yeah,
by the time you're teaching an ML course right now, by the end of that course, the whole new transformer model or the things came
yeah,
out. So to catch up, like you're like even they are 4 months behind because they have to decide on the curriculum, and if you have to have
yeah.
like 4 years of curriculum, like I don't know how the
It
education
can't.
practice, yeah.
It can't. I mean, it just can't. Um, yeah, and there's like these divides then, like like super upper end mathematics as being like the only real place to gain agency. Otherwise, you're it's kind of like we're forcing a lot of people to be tool users now, and like can never be a tool builder. At the same time, we're making it possible for everybody to be a tool builder. So it's super interesting. It's a very exciting time to be alive.
Yeah. I'm gonna share one hot take. Like after working in this Gen AI native applications, I think uh, there is, if the firms have like good data strategy and that fine tuning, like Chat GPT Mid Journey hasn't seen like this enterprise locked drawings or data set or renderings which with that more tagging and better. There's and I have done experiments like with 100 to 1,000 images fine-tuned on diffusion. You could beat a localized region-specific model than a generic model, and I that's why I'm more interested in like the B2B route of enterprise uh, training and doing, because it's open AI don't have access, and
Yeah.
like the enterprise like AC firms have resources but they lack the strategy, and that's where the startup has the opportunity. Okay, we will do the offload of resources and compute will help you train, but I don't
Yeah.
know, it's again my hypothesis.
No, I think you're right. Right. I mean, you're seeing all these new like synthetic data consulting companies coming online, and it's this kind of same thing that we saw with parametrics and computational design and stuff before. There's firms like Perkins&Will or Foster's, like certain people that have the resources internally to be able to leverage those tools. But then, you know, that's there's only a handful, right? Like you can probably count them on two hands, the number of people who are really adequate, number of firms that are really adequately resourced to tap into these things. So there's like all the rest of the architects in the world, right, that need somebody to help them, somebody to support them. Increasingly, it'll be more and more done by another company and less done by people inside of that company, right?
Yeah, and like I could imagine, like let's say these big firms have like projects in major cities, like a small time in Iowa or something. Like
Yeah.
there's SMBs who have drawings and all the constraints, and it's
Yeah.
that localization is an interesting challenge. But I don't know. It's not a straightforward problem. The economics to run a startup in ACE is challenging too. So.
Yeah, it's a hard sector, hard discipline to be a startup in for sure.
Okay, I know like it's getting pretty late. So I have a rapid fire round, but before that,
Okay.
I wanted to ask a question. Is there anything which we didn't cover in this interview, and you'd like to share a note or talk about it?
No, I mean, I think we've talked about a lot of stuff, a lot of really good stuff. Just to give a shout out to the IO team at large and Perkins&Will, digital at large. Since you've left, we're have some interesting convergences that are happening with research, IO, and digital practice increasingly working together. The work that we're doing, I think we're spending less time kind of hoping or seeking out the moonshot and looking to lean more on the all of the incredible expertise and discipline that's in the studios themselves. And I think that's starting to pay off, getting much better engagement from the architects and the designers, boots on the ground, and starting to look at facing clients in some interesting new ways too. So yeah, I think IO's moving in a pretty interesting place, and yeah, just want to give a shout out to the team and thanks for everyone's hard work.
Yeah, like I must say, like the culture, the team, everyone has so much different way of thinking and bringing a different perspective on the table. Like one of the strength of the whole IO team. Like I had a great time. I miss those days for sure. Like it's the great culture. Um, so for the rapid fire, the challenge is you just have 5 to 10 seconds to answer, and you gotta keep it super brief. So most
Okay.
of the interviews fail at that. They start and
Yeah,
like they
okay, this
couldn't
is the
start.
hard part.
Okay, Isaac, uh, who's your role model?
Oh, geez. Who's my role model? Andy Tanucci is my role model. Andy Tanucci is an architect and academic here in Chicago. He's a good friend of mine, and yeah, just as a teacher, as a thoughtful person, as a design thinker, just yeah, Andy Tanucci is my role model.
I see. Uh, Travel destination which is in your bucket list to visit next.
I hope it's next. I doubt it's next, but I would say biggest bucket list is Japan. And I want to go to Japan. I want to see Tokyo. I want to be in the city. But the real reason I want to go to Japan is because they have the best powder in the world, Japao as it's referred to. So yeah, I want to do some deep powder skiing in Japan really badly.
Yeah. What happened to the big buildings king in Copenhagen?
Oh yeah, the
Yeah,
Copenhagen, the garbage, is it like a recycling facility or something like that with a
yeah.
ski hill on it? Yeah, definitely want to try that too.
I remember you mentioned. Any book or video which made a big impact in your life?
Um, I mean, wow. Um, when I was in school, we were reading Deleuze, and I think that was, part of disengaging from the architecture dialogue and being in this kind of space thinking about connectivity and meaning, and that time was certainly very influential. um, I think the open source manifestos, Eric Raymond's book, was pretty influential. Um, yeah,
I, for students who are about to graduate, or for young computational designers in the, like, one piece of advice for them, and another caution, like what are the potential traps they could fall, or like
yeah,
how to
yeah.
navigate the noise.
Yeah, this is something that I've been talking to young practitioners about whenever possible. At Perkins&Will, we have the IO team. We have some specialized positions, and I feel very fortunate to be able to operate within these privileged positions that are connected to practice but are not practice, right? I'm not a billable employee. So I get to operate in a different way that's very privileged. But I, people are often looking to join the IO team. I've got all this computational design experience. I can program in Python, and I think the thing that's maybe not super clear to these folks is that, like, what we're doing with IO is definitely digital architecture, etc. But in some ways it's disconnected from the process of designing a building. It's about software engineering, it's about the technology, and that changes what you're working on, right? It changes the expertise and the skill set that you need to have. And I think a lot of folks are coming out with computational design experience that think that they want to be software developers, and I would just like encourage them to pump the brakes, because I don't know if that's really what they want to do, because I think to do that right requires a real change in discipline, that I think also undermines what we're missing the most, at least in a firm like Perkins&Will. Other firms, you go to Shop or somewhere like that, the story is different. But in a firm, a bigger firm, a more kind of traditional firm like Perkins&Will, what we need more of are for those computational designers to not go into some specialized little niche group somewhere, but to go into the studio, to go through the process of becoming an architect. Don't try and shortcut it. Like, we had 3D Studio Max, like all that stuff in the 90s and early 2000s created roles that people could leave architecture and like go like be a visualizer or do something else. It was separate. And I think what we need more of are people who know what a database is, who can program Python, who can do computational design, who, all of these things, but want to be an architect,
Mm.
that want to design a building and can, one, be patient about not having everything have to be crazy parametric all the time, because if that's what you require, then you're going to have a hard time integrating with a more conventional studio. But to be patient, but at the same time champion the use and demonstrate the value, and help people who don't get it yet or can't understand it, help them to get it, help them to understand it. That's how we're really, if we really want to take off at Perkins&Will, and we want the things that we're doing in digital practice and IO and research to really, really go, we need more of that thinking inside the studio itself. So I'd encourage computational designers to stop running away from being architects and like really like focus on building buildings and learning more of the fundaments and applying computational design in the process.
Yeah, and like it directly hits, because like I have limited years, I don't have a lot, but from those years of experience in the field, like it's learning technology, like is like you can always do right now or 2 years later, but like getting deeper domain problems is irreversible. Like once you go in the software, it's difficult to go
Yeah,
back as an architect. Like you can always
yeah,
go as a software developer 2 years from now, and that deeper domain problems leads to ideas or problem to be solved, that leads to
yeah.
an intention of what to develop, rather than just building cool things and let
That
let
that's
hope.
right.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
that's
could relate.
exactly right.
Yeah. What is the most difficult thing you have done in life?
Um, Raise a child. Honestly, yeah, like I've had it, teaching has been super rewarding, and I've engaged with adults and children, and that's an amazing process when they're your own, when it's your own child. It's a different story. I would say, and the hardest part about that is not unlike the students that you want to, where you want to get to a point where you can step back and let them just be themselves. um, that's kind of the hardest thing, and I'm fortunate that I learned how to do that in teaching, and I would say my daughter's 3 months from leaving home to go to Pratt. She's going to go to school at Pratt in
Oh,
August, and yeah, so she's a few months away, and I don't know that I've yet got to that point of comfort with her yet. So that's probably the hardest
oh, yeah. Congratulations
thing.
for that. In like, how does a day in a retired life of Thomas look like?
So my exit strategy, I've been thinking about for quite a while. Retirement, of course, won't be true retirement. I intend to continue to generate revenue, probably until I die. But I'm actually interested, and maybe this is also a little bit of a response to the 2030 question, that like I see in the future, as things are so easy with digital technology, that there'll be a complete pushback to stuff that's explicitly physical. Things that can only be experienced in these kind of pure physical ways, like standing on a mountaintop. Maybe Kurzweil's nanobots will make us be able to, stand on the mountaintop too, but I see, like, uh, hospitality as a kind of future that AI can't completely take away. So cooking food and like creating hospitable places for people. So I imagine that my retirement is about creating a kind of retreat where people are coming and staying and, I don't know, learning and playing and, leisure, and maybe it's in the mountains or maybe it's wherever, but it's an escape, and it's a physical escape, and it's about being in this physical place with physical people. um, that's what I imagine my retirement being about, how I create that kind of special place, and hopefully that creates enough revenue that I can just do that till I'm done.
Do that, do more skiing, then
Yeah,
again.
exactly. Yeah, I'll have a pump track on the property, and I ride my bike. And
Yeah, this got me thinking. Maybe around the world, skiing at different spots. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, a network. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe you've heard about this idea of like networked cities.
yeah, yeah.
Pretty
Well,
interesting. So like DAOs and network cities. Yeah, it'll be something like that.
I see. The last one is, what's your favorite movie?
Oh, so I wanted to go to film school. Tarantino was happening at the time. Pulp Fiction was probably, one of the most important movies of that time for me, and probably still one of my all-time favorite movies. But I think, as of the last, handful of years, I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is. I'd rather watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood today than Pulp Fiction today.
Ooh, that's any TV series recently, or
I don't. I try and avoid TV generally, and I don't watch. I very very rarely watch films either these days. But a Black Mirror, of course, and Westworld, like some of my favorite shows for sure.
I see. All right. As usual, it's an incredible pleasure talking to you. I get your energy makes me pumped to do more or like get back into the flow state. So it's contagious for sure. So thanks a lot, Thomas, for sharing all the stories. And I also want to thank you for being an amazing mentor for me. Like changed my career, impacted me a lot. So thanks for everything, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you too, Myra. It's been great talking to you. Look forward to seeing you sometime soon.
Hopefully in Japan. Let's see.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay,
Take
bye
care.
bye.